All right, hey guys, it's Mr. Bartolini. This is the first of several weeks worth of videos we're gonna try here and add a little something to hopefully the videos and other stuff that you're working on. I want to start off by just saying I hope all of you are doing well. Hope you and your families are staying safe, or staying inside, and keeping going outdoors to a minimal. I know it's hard for a lot of people with work and obviously with meeting their needs. But I really do hope you guys are all doing well and staying strong through all of this. This is very unprecedented times that we're living through, and something most of us probably never thought we'd see. Certainly a bizarre and unique set of circumstances, but hope you guys are trying to stay positive, get some time with your family, hopefully get to talk to friends, and at least try to enjoy what you can with this. And now on to the actual subject stuff. So I know every teacher's doing it a little differently. If you guys have been on the website, you've seen what I had planned for the course of the next several weeks here. You're basically going to get one of these a week with me providing some additional kind of background and explanation to all the stuff from the videos you're going to be watching each week. Those are all posted as well, and we're going to try on Friday for the conference call, whoever wants to jump in on that. And I'm going to be trying to get those out to you either tonight or tomorrow. So just going to take you through piece by piece here. This PowerPoint is going to be up on the website as well, and you'll be able to go back and check it out if you want to, but I'm going to go through kind of piece by piece as we proceed here. So there were three different videos you had to watch. A lot of this, I know topic-wise, is review from stuff we were doing before we left school. Even a couple of the videos I think we watched in their entirety, or at least parts of, before we left. I wanted to do it, though, as kind of just a refresher, then allow us, as we proceed here, to get through the rest of the material and go a bit more in depth to the stuff we haven't talked about. So first one, dealing with the Industrial Revolution. A couple of the key points. All of this are going to be, the slides are going to be some of the quotes from the video, or just some of the ideas, reminders, and do some explanation. And we're going to go through each of the videos in sequential order. So the Industrial Revolution being seen as more revolutionary than the American, French, and Latin American revolutions. And then the definition that John Green provides: an increase in production brought about by the use of machines and characterized by the use of new energy sources. So he emphasizes it from the start, and it is an important point to make, how this revolution is seen on a more grander scale and greater than all the national type revolutions. The colonies break away from Britain in the Americas, the revolutions within France, all these countries all over the world. The more long-lasting impact that the Industrial Revolution had. And you need look no further than literally what we're doing right now. The fact that with the physical school being closed, we are modifying and have the capability to present stuff to you, to have you working. That is in no small part because of the Industrial Revolution. There's kind of the key point, this next slide here, is what I think he does a great job in the video, just kind of listing off product after product. And it's really about how we live our lives. There's a topic we cover, and I actually just did it with my economics lesson, about specialization. The idea that it's not just you with your family making everything, growing everything that you need to survive. It's that people developed certain skills, the ability to produce things. Those are in demand, and you need to get things that other people make. Industrial Revolution was a huge part of that. So how we live our lives, the way we work, the way we interact with each other, all of that is attributed. And it was kind of an odd point, maybe if you caught it, but the whole idea of 12 years of compulsory public education, that is part of the Industrial Revolution. It was even based off different models back then. Education wasn't for everyone all the time. At some points it was only if you could afford it. At some points it was only men were expected to go to school, and even that was only if you were going to go into a couple certain fields. The idea of everybody having a knowledge base to create more and innovate more came from this time period. Basically, we are surrounded by it at all times, everything we do. One of the quotes in there I wanted to make sure you guys saw: wages were high and energy was cheap. These prices led directly to the Industrial Revolution by giving firms strong incentives to invent technologies that substituted capital and coal for labor. So he's using this in kind of identifying why Europe was at the center of the Industrial Revolution, even more specifically, why England was a big center of it. He does try to make the distinction that it could have easily been China or India. There were factors that, kind of prevented that from being the case. A lot of advantages worked in England's favor and Europe's favor. And this was arguably a lot of it. The key idea being there that, the wages were high. They were needing people to come into these fields. It was going away from an entirely agricultural type economy, and sources of energy were cheap. You could pay people good wages to make a living off, digging out these energy sources. Businesses had the incentives to keep coming up with stuff. They had more access to workers, to new energy sources. And it was kind of this cyclical relationship. You see that in the next quote here. It may have sounded a little weird, but it's kind of that relation. You can do it with a lot of things nowadays. Steam engines used cheap British coal to keep British coal cheap, and cheap British coal created the opportunity for everything from railroads to steel, which, like so much else in the Industrial Revolution, created a positive feedback loop. He uses that phrase a few times, positive feedback loop, that basically being able to mine the coal that would be used for engines, would be used for all sorts of inventions. It could be kept cheap. It was still in demand. That allowed for new things to be built that then could turn around and create new energy sources, find new energy sources that then could be used for other tools. And it was basically a constant process. There was some notes I made when we were talking about the textile industry, that you had technological innovations that sped up weaving. That created greater demand for yarn. That led to new inventions. Then using the water power led to creation of the steam engine, which got more water out of the coal mines. Then they improved on the engine, which allowed for railroads, steamboats, using chemicals to bleach cloth. Then production of lead, which was by factories run by coal. If it gets confusing, the thing you just have to understand is all these resources were being used in these kind of new and innovative ways. They were finding ways to produce products faster, to produce new products, to build new machinery that could help in the production of those things. And as they did that, then there just became more demand for those resources or for those energy sources. So then there was more work to get that because they could keep building and innovating. So hopefully that kind of helps clarify everything there. Now, moving on to the next episode. This is one I'm going to be careful of trying to go too deep into. It's amazing how these things relate too, but I just did a bit on the capitalism and socialism with my economics group too, because we're studying the economic systems. This is still a fundamental concept for you guys to know, for you guys to understand. We're going to do kind of a cursory look at it, because these are terms get thrown around a lot: socialism, communism, capitalism. And there's often a misrepresentation of them. The thing that has to be understood about all of them is that there are other factors that impact them as well. These are all economic ideas. Now, we're presenting them in history class because they relate very significantly to the development of countries. And with the governments in those countries, what systems they chose to put in place. Okay, now building off the idea of the Industrial Revolution gives you the definition of industrial capitalism. Economic system that relies on the investment of capital in machines and technology that are used to increase the production of marketable goods. Simpler way of putting that, it's based on putting money into technology that will help you make more stuff that you can sell. That's industrial capitalism, okay? The basic distinction, if it'll help you understand, we'll look at some of the socialism ideas here in a minute with the slides, but when we say capitalism, it's what in the economics field is seen as a free market economy. Basically that you are free to start any business, to produce something new, to find new ways to make it, and to sell it. It's that idea of the free market, is anybody can come up with something, and if you have an audience, if you have customers, they will buy it. The part that was significant, especially with this industrial capitalism at this time, was that both men and women were being both consumers and producers. Okay, now obviously there's still a lot of history we go through where women becoming more steady part of the workforce. That's a societal change that takes over time, but the fact that both groups were consumers, and as this was evolving, both were becoming producers as well. In keeping with the idea of capitalism first, there's a couple points John makes, which is good. The first bullet point there, the main spur to trade, or rather to industry and ingenuity, is the exorbitant appetite of men, which they will take great pain to gratify. Again, kind of help clarify a little bit, the main reason we have trade, now this can be trade good for good or trade money for good. Okay, that's still a form of trade. You're giving up one thing to get another. Basically saying the main motivation of it is our own appetite for stuff, which the last part, which they will take great pain to gratify. Basically, we'll go out of our way to get things that we want. Maybe a modern example would be nowadays, unfortunately, the toilet paper. You guys, I'm sure, have seen over the course of the past month and a half here, the mad rush of people to go buy toilet paper, to the point that it's in limited availability right now. People went to great lengths to get as much as they could. Not entirely sure why, if they thought that COVID-19 was going to give you diarrhea or something, but apparently they did. But that's a pretty good example. I mean, you can see them across the board. When you have the lines outside of an Apple store when a new product comes out, the lines outside of Chick-fil-A waiting to get something, people will go to great lengths to feed their appetite, not just for food, but just for things that they want. So that's the main motivation of trade. The point John also makes was about capitalism being a cultural system, okay, rooted in the need of private investors to turn a profit. So not only an economic system, he makes the argument of it is as a cultural system. And that's where I said the other factors can come into play in terms of politics, government, society in general, okay? These are economic systems and economic theories. One of the key points for you to understand, and we go more into it when you take economics, but there is no pure form of any of these systems. There is no pure free market capitalism. There is no pure socialism or no pure communism. There are versions of all of those, but most in reality is a mix, okay? If you take the US as the example, a lot of people push the idea we are a capitalist society. Generally speaking, we are. We adhere to free market principles a lot of the time. But we have socialism in our country. We have socialism in our system. Case in point would be you don't call around for different police forces if a crime is happening. Okay? There's not competing police forces to see if you can get a good rate if you have a break-in at your house. There's just police force provided for the security of people. Something like that. It's just a matter of degree and in what areas people think those principles should apply. Should it always be about making a profit, or should it be about serving public good? What blend between the two? Now, if you notice, kind of as you talk about it, John Green kind of downplays a lot of the ideas of socialism. What can get confusing about it is when they're tied in with other countries. Okay, you might hear reference to like Cuba or Venezuela that have aspects of socialism in them, or a big part of their economy. Understand that there are other factors that play in as well beyond the economic system. It's what type of government, what type of relations do they have with other countries. Venezuela is one I hear a lot of people criticize as, look, it's a socialist, hellscape or whatever. It's terrible there. But sometimes they leave out the fact that there are incredible economic sanctions that countries, including the US, have put on Venezuela, which makes it harder for businesses to continue, for people to, have money. Those factors come into play. Now, looking at a couple of the points here. Socialism is a result of human choice and human planning. Basically, when we're looking at socialism and communism, in a very simple way of defining it, they're more driven to be community-based, instead of that everything should be for the common good. Communism, one of the defining principles that Karl Marx talked about, was eliminating the idea of private property. So it would just be more communal-based. Now, obviously, you need some force to implement that, and the reason communism has got the reputation that it does is because those the countries that have been quote-unquote communist have also had authoritarian governments. So, that obviously doesn't end up working well most of the time. But there are, countries, some of the Scandinavian countries like Norway or, Sweden, that have adopted some of the principles, but with a different type of government. So you have examples of those all over. More people tend to be motivated by, the capitalist system, the free market, having that freedom to go and do a bunch of stuff, and not having, the general that things should be provided. But, there's a lot of different viewpoints depending on what thing you're talking about. The idea, some of the quotes in there, is that, production gives life material meaning and humans are social animals. It was some of the arguments put in about, in a way, kind of for socialism, is that, everybody taking part, and realistically everybody should benefit, that we're social animals by nature, and everyone in that community base, would do well. John Green, as he says, that socialism is an imperfect opposite to capitalism. There's a lot, it's a simple quote, but there's a lot to that. I don't necessarily want to go a ton into it. The use of the word imperfect is maybe a little questionable, because nobody's saying anything is perfect. There is definitely, two different viewpoints for the two sides, capitalism and socialism. But the ultimate lesson is that we are a mixed economy. Most countries of the world are a mixed economy. They have a blend to the two. It's just a matter of kind of which one is the bigger part. Now, final video you guys had was the one on nationalism. And I think it's entirely possible we watched all three, but it can just be a review here. The nationalism side, because the thing is, this is going to set the stage for, we're going to build back up on the conversation about imperialism, and then we start getting into World War I, World War II. Those will be in the coming weeks here. But looking at nationalism, the idea, look at the first bullet point, nationalism is a global phenomenon and included countless countries and world leaders, some as federated states, some as independent nations. He, at the start of the video, references just basically all sorts of sections of the world. A lot of them is what we did in the projects that we finished right before we shut down. So, Canada being a federation for Britain, Australia and New Zealand, what they were going through, some of the countries breaking away, having their independent movements. It was this very much spread around the world, the idea, even, I think you mentioned in the video, the American Civil War being kind of reflecting of nationalism and the American country that came out of that. What he does mention, and we are going to hold off on it, just like he said, the second bullet point, the nationalism that tries to eliminate differences in the effort, tries to eliminate difference in the efforts to create a homogeneous, mythologized, unitary polity. It's a lot of big words. He puts up pictures of Hitler, Mussolini from Italy, I think it was Admiral Yamamoto from Japan. It's the nationalism that fueled the Nazis, the fascists, and was a big part of World War II. That was the sense of, we not only have pride in ourselves, we think we are superior and we should dominate the rest of the world. Trying to, what again, what they were trying to do is, in many ways, wanting that homogenous, just all being the same. That they, would all be German, all be Italian, whatever, and would have their different parts of the world. That was their vision. That's a phenomenally warped version of nationalism, which we'll get to in future weeks. The part that John identifies as being very difficult through a lot of this, and is very much a valid point, is how we define a nation state, how we define just a nation, period. There's a couple ways of looking at it you see on the screen. A centralized government that can claim and exercise authority over a distinct territory. That's the state part. So you have a government overseeing this area of land, with a certain degree of linguistic and cultural homogeneity. So this is the idea that a certain degree of everybody speaking the same language, having the same culture. So the fact that in Germany, people speak German. In France, people speak French. In America, people speak English, And having cultural practices that are common across the board. That's just defining this, the idea of a nation state. But then the quote, the second bullet point from the author James Joyce, his piece Ulysses, a nation is the same people living in the same place, or also living in different places. He mentions remembering the Irish diaspora, the Jewish diaspora, when whole segments of the population were, spread all over the world. It's kind of a play on the idea, the fact that we think of the nation as one place, but Americans are also Americans wherever they go. Australians are also Australians wherever they go. Indians, Chinese are those wherever they go. Even if they're living places, you have that certain national identity to where you're from, to your home. It can get tricky, and where it gets tricky with some of this is, the big empires that had a bunch of land, and then you can easily get into the aspect of forced nationalism, is wanting everyone to behave in a certain way to have that pride in one's nation. The changes over time, okay? He goes through a nice amount of the history, talking about the multinational empires like the Austro-Hungarians that broke into several different countries because you had different national identities developing. They did not necessarily all, subscribe to being Austro-Hungarian. They had their own ethnic background, their own cultural background, and maybe saw the need to have their own nation. How that looks with individual countries, with the territories that countries hold, with those independence movements. And it's a long history for countries like the US, France, Britain, Germany, all sorts that had big empires all over the world, how they kind of ruled over it. Did those people see themselves as that nation that they belonged to? India, for a long time, was a British colony, and it was one of the probably more famous nationalistic movements. If you even consider maybe like a modern example, Puerto Rico. Well, Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens, technically, but they do not have a representation in Congress. They have a representative, but can't vote, much like those who live in Washington, D.C. But is there the sense, do they identify more as the country where they live and the practices, or as Americans, even though they are. It can create some tensions. The other point, the influence of government and ruling entities to encourage or require demonstration of nationalism. That's where, again, it can be a sliding scale. Is it more positive? Is it more negative? Does it get into encouraging certain behaviors to show off, or is it required? If you want to think about it, in the state of Michigan, if you guys remember what we do every fourth hour, what all teachers are supposed to do, show the daily announcements. And the first part of the daily announcements is always the Pledge of Allegiance. That is required by law for all students to do that. Okay, that is, in a way, very much a portrayal of nationalistic pride for everyone to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, there are ways where it can get, more intense, what's required, or ways it could be less intense. Again, it's a sliding scale. It's just something to think about when we talk about the idea of nationalism and, is it complete devotion to a country, or is it, just a common bond that you share with other people who live here. The final part, really, to wrap up, is he spends a good portion of the end of the video talking about Japan. And I just put a couple points up here that he emphasized when looking at their development. They go from the Tokugawa rulers. They had the daimyo, those kind of elites, the samurai warriors, which we're kind of familiar with just through like cultural references. That evolution from that into like the nation of Japan that they became, the arrival of Matthew Perry, the Commodore from the U.S., opening up trade. Japan had to kind of take some harsh deals on that. Later on from there, the Meiji Restoration. This was, again, a couple of the projects that you guys did, but really becoming kind of more of a modern society, adapting their government, compulsory education. And what came with that, and it's kind of mentioned at the end, there was this expansion with the nationalism. And that's the dark side mentioned on there, the second bullet point, included thriving on conflict. There is a certain aspect of human history and the history of countries and empires that the expansion, which is maybe seen as part of nationalism, you have this nation and becoming bigger and bigger, but that invites conflict because you're taking others' land. And we've seen it all throughout with countries that tried to build bigger and bigger empires, build bigger and bigger land, inevitably leads to some horrible conflicts. Even though one of the most important factors, as he mentioned, for the nation itself is stability. But stability, depends on how everyone is fitting into the system. And when you have certain segments of the population get more and more upset, it can push for these reforms. So you just have a little bit of history there with Japan to go through. That kind of brings us to the end. Again, guys, I hope all of you are doing well. You're staying safe. You're staying sane, trying to entertain yourselves as much as possible. I know from the students I've talked to already on some emails and conference calls that it doesn't seem like sleep schedules are really all that good. And there's a good chance you guys might be watching this at like 4 a.m. or something before you decide to go to sleep. But either way, I hope you're, trying to keep busy, get to talk to and see, your family, talk to your friends. Just please stay safe. I do miss seeing everybody, and feel free to reach out, email me, whatever, if you need anything during this time. If you got any questions, I'm going to try to shut this down, but we'll talk to you guys soon.